Are you? Okay. And can everybody see Bill? I think so. Okay.
I'll try to speak up.
Now, you know what? I actually have a little PA system I could bring in.
Oh, no, I think,
Do
can you
have
hear me, Bill?
I hear you.
Okay.
All right, here, yeah. Well, good morning. Everybody is, so again, just so nice to have everybody together. And I said, you know, there's just breakfast, you know, apple pie for breakfast for Christmas. I was like, we can do, absolutely, just we can celebrate the season together. And in that regard, very, very grateful that you've had the time to be able to come and join us. And, you know, everybody looks forward to your visit so much.
Well, probably not as much as I do. I enjoy it really.
Next month, January, which is the first Thursday, I think it's January 3rd. It is, because that Friday, January 4th, is my daughter's 40th birthday. Hard to believe. So Thursday, January 3rd, our Director of Veteran Services, Karen Tyler, will be with us. So that's very nice. And I already was able to get Chief Cudmore has scheduled us for the February breakfast. So that's great. So we've got things to look forward to, you know, as the new year begins. But I'm going to turn this right to Bill and be able to, you know, poor Pete. There's always one. But thank you again. And, you know, it's just a real joy to be able to have you all together. So, you know, we have the time to be able to sit and to visit and to enjoy each other's company. And again, at this time of year, it's just very nice to have that time together. And this building just gives us those options. And, you know, I'm always grateful that we're here and that you're here.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Charlie.
Well, I don't want to be repetitive, but there's only so much history in an area. No, but I thought today, you know what might be interesting is to walk you verbally through our burial ground. Not entirely, there's a lot of graves there, but in terms of some of the people that you might like to know, we're in our district, we're in our Byfield Parish. And for those that don't know, just let me, I try to say this every time. Byfield Parish is not a town, it's a district with, originally it was part of Newbury and Rowley, and then when Georgetown came into existence in 1833, this part of Rowley became Georgetown, and this section, therefore, of Byfield Parish was in Georgetown. So really, Byfield Parish overlaps 3 towns. On our end with Erie 4, you're in Georgetown. If you go to the Jewel Mill out on the highway on Route 1, if you've noticed that, that's in Rowley, and you just go up the road a little ways, you're at Governor Dummer, and you're in Newbury. So that's how it worked. It was a parish setting. So most everything, whether it's the Newbury side, Rowley side, or our Georgetown side, can be considered at least a history of Byfield Parish. I was reminded how important sometimes, or at least how important graves can be in some people's minds who see, oh, I just have a feeling for being there and seeing this gravestone or monument to someone that they've read about or thought about. And one of these occasions was when I was coming out of our church, and there was a car sitting out there with 2 older people in it, and had Tennessee plates. And I assumed, because it was often true, that they were looking for Route 95, because nobody can find it from the Byfield Parish Church. It seems like a great mystery. So I went up to them, and that's what I presumed they were looking for, because they couldn't get into the church; it was locked, and they were probably looking for direction. Well, they weren't. It turned out that they said, "Is Elijah Parrish's grave here?" And I said, "Well, yes, it is." And this started a conversation. They wanted to see it. I said, well, I can show you where it is. It turned out that Elijah Parrish, well, this didn't turn out to them, they knew this, he was the 3rd pastor of the Byfield Parish Church. He came to the church in the aftermath of the Revolutionary War, and he died in 1825. But when a young man came from Albion, Maine, to study at Governor Dummer and was a farm boy, no money, Their wealth was in land. The pastor, Elijah Parrish, who was our third pastor, gave this boy room and board in the parsonage, the church-owned home. And he was there for 3 years, studied, and went home, married his sweetheart up here in Albion, Maine, and their first child was a son. And they named him for our pastor. So he became Elijah Parrish, and this boy that came was named Lovejoy, Daniel Lovejoy. So Elijah Parrish Lovejoy was born. Well, Daniel Lovejoy was in Byfield when Byfield was really a center of sorts for the anti-slave movement long before the Emancipation Proclamation was signed in 1863. And so this had an effect on Daniel Lovejoy, and he must have brought it to his dining room table with all his kids, and he had a number of them, as the average in those days was still about 10 per family. And so Elijah Parrish Lovejoy, and then later on he had a brother Owen, all heard this discussion, and it affected them, and Elijah Parrish Lovejoy became an important abolitionist. And in fact, he was shot and killed in Alton, Illinois, defending his printing press, because he was printing abolitionist material, And John Quincy Adams, who had studied in Byfield, John Adams sent John Quincy Adams to Byfield to study law under our second pastor's son. John Quincy Adams, at the time, in 37, had already been president, and when he heard of Elijah Parrish Lovejoy's death, he said, "That's an American earthquake. It's going to change the face of America." And sure enough, the younger brother, Owen Lovejoy, took up his brother's cause. 10 years later, became friends with Abraham Lincoln. And when he died, Abraham Lincoln said of Owen Lovejoy, "He was my best friend." And if you read the correspondence, you can see that Owen Lovejoy was instrumental in Abraham Lincoln finally deciding not just to keep the Union together with the war, but to also emancipate the slaves. So it's very interesting. And so that's why they were there, because this couple, turned out, had been the pastor and wife at Owen Lovejoy's church out in Indiana. So they wanted to go to the graveyard to see Elijah Parrish's grave. So I realize that for a lot of people, that's important to see these monuments and these gravestones. So I'm going to recount to you some of the ones that are in our Byfield graveyard. There's interesting ones in all of our cemeteries, whether you're talking about Harmony or Union, or even the other one we have one, a Georgetown graveyard across the street from the Byfield Parish Church. But I'm talking about the old burial ground. That's not used anymore, and it's right around the old church site. Let me just give you, first of all, a listing of the ones I think are very important. Then I'll go back and, whatever time we have, talk to you a little about each one. But first of all, the Byfield Parish Church, in its claim, makes the claim that it's the first independent congregational church in America. That's interesting. Because congregationalism can be arguably, congregationalism actually gave America. Because it was the Congregationalists who were rebelling against the Episcopal form of government, which was true of the Roman Catholic Church or the Episcopal Church or the Methodist Church, where the pastor usually ran the church. They had authority. And the Congregationalists, you take their name, Congregationalists believe, no, that's not the way it's supposed to work. God is in all of our lives, and he can speak to all of us as a congregation. The pastors are there to teach. They're there to pastor, but they're not there to rule. The congregation can hear from God itself and decide among itself what God is saying to different churches. And those are the people that founded our country. And a lot of these ideas got taken right over into the political scene, so that we were not going to have a king. We were going to have a country, and we were going to vote in as a citizenry our leaders. And we take it for granted, but this is where it came from. It came from our area where we live today, because this is where the original Congregationalists were planted. It's very interesting, I found it interesting, that when we had the Boston bombing, and they had the service of worship that week, Thursday, down at the Holy Cross Cathedral in Boston, and President Obama came, and our governor then was Deval Patrick, and they all came to the mic to speak, and it was a hard time for us because this poor kid got killed, and then the Boston bombing, we all remember that. And when Deval Patrick went to the microphone, he said an interesting thing, I thought. He stood up to the microphone down at that, he said, Massachusetts created America. If I were there, I would have said, Deval. It was this church I served at was instrumental in dividing church and state and being the first independent congregational church in America, and really setting the stage for a relationship between church and state where the state no longer ran the church like it did when the Pilgrims and Puritans came here. Now, the church was free to be the church and influence a country, but not have that relationship. It was independent of it. That began right down the road here in Byfield. And the interesting thing about the Byfield Parish Church is it was founded by a woman. Puritan Church, 1706 was the official date of the beginning, but they were actually worshiping as early as 1702. And it was a woman named Mehetabel Moody who got fed up with having to pack her kids into a wagon in the dead of winter with no good roads and haul them over either to Rowley or Newbury to church, and if they didn't go, they got fined back in her day, 1600s. And so she was instrumental in getting a parish church so she could have a church out in her own district. And that's the Byfield Parish Church today. Another important, interesting gravestone. Hers, by the way, is the first gravestone she was the first one buried behind the old church building. Then you have another stone over to the right. It was put in by the parishioners of the church for a girl 8 years old. Her name was Sarah Durant. She was the daughter of the fifth pastor. Sarah died of smallpox in 1843. She was 8 years old. Her father, Henry Durant, never fully recovered. So he just couldn't function in the pastoral role. They tried him as a teacher at Governor Dummer for a while, and they actually set him up with a factory at the Falls, see if that would help, at least get him a vocation. But nothing worked, and so finally he got on a ship up here in Newburyport, and he sailed to San Francisco, really to Oakland. And at Oakland, he was instrumental in founding the University of California at Oakland. And so I've heard, and maybe somebody here has been there and could tell me, because I was going to go to Oakland when our oldest son went to California to school, and we took him out. And I wanted to know if it was true that the main drag in front of the buildings of the University of California or Oakland is Durant Avenue. I don't know. I suppose I could look it up on Google if I had any technical expertise to get into my own. But anyway, no. But I've heard that. So her monument was put in by the parishioners, and that's one of the grave sites there. Sarah Durant, this 8-year-old girl, who in oblique way was somewhat instrumental in the coming forth of the University of California. Also in our graveyard, in our burial grounds, is the village blacksmith of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's poem. The Longfellows came from Byfield. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow used to come to Byfield to visit his cousins, who were still on the Longfellow farm as early as 1900, 1901. Stephen Longfellow was the son of the original Longfellow. Anne Longfellow was his mother. And Henry writes a poem about this man who was his, I guess Henry Wadsworth Longfellow was about 4 generations or 5 from Stephen, the blacksmith. But he does write these 2 stanzas in his poem, The Village Blacksmith. Longfellow writes, he, the village blacksmith, goes on Sunday to the church and sits among his boys. He hears the parson pray and preach. He hears his daughter's voice singing in the village choir, and it makes his heart rejoice. It sounds to him like his mother's voice singing in paradise. He needs must think of her once more and how in the grave she lies. And with his hard, rough hand he wipes a tear out from his eyes. Well, that was in the Byfield church that he hears the singing. That's where the Longfellows were. They were part of that church. Then you have, I mentioned Elijah Parrish, so I'll skip that. Then you have a woman who's not mentioned in at least the latest recounting. One of our Boy Scouts, going for Eagle Scout, went through that burial ground. It was wonderful work he did. And he labeled all the graves. He's got them all marked and where they are. It's easy to find them and all. But I looked for a name and he doesn't have it, and I gotta give him a call and tell him about this because he probably doesn't know she's there. But there was a black slave girl that was in the home of the pastor in, this would be in the Revolutionary War period. Violet was her name. Parsons, Moses Parsons, our second pastor, came from Gloucester, and he had 3 slaves. They weren't field slaves. They were house working in the house. Violet was like a almost like eventually like a nursemaid to the kids. And then there were 2 boys, and in the Byfield Church at that time was the most anti-slavery guy, the most, at least he was counted to be the one who wrote most prolifically on the anti-slavery movement, Benjamin Coleman. Now, can you imagine having a pastor who owns 3 slaves and the most anti-slavery person probably in Massachusetts is in his congregation and in one of his leaders? It must have made for a wonderful church meeting at that point. And so anyway, finally, Moses Parsons, the pastor, bit the bullet, and he got the 3 slaves into the parsonage living room, and he said, "You're free. You're free." He freed them, and the 2 boys thanked him and left. Violet said, "Oh no, you've had the best of me. You're getting the worst of me. I'm not going anywhere." And she lived to be almost 90, and the kids took care of her. The Parson children took care of Violet. But the interesting thing is, and she's not listed in here, and I bet the young man who did this didn't know this, that when she died, she was buried in the parson's tomb with the pastor and his wife. And the president of Harvard, Kirkland, came and conducted her funeral. So the president of Harvard conducted the funeral of the slave girl, and she was buried with the family in the parson's tomb down at the end of the graveyard. Another figure in the Revolutionary War period was a man named Moses Coleman. Moses Coleman lived, if you know Triton Regional High School, if you go by there a lot, when you're at Triton Drive, if you look across the hill in that house up on the hill, that was Moses Coleman's house. And when Washington was at Valley Forge and suffering because they really couldn't supply him correctly, and we all probably one another know the story of that awful winter at Valley Forge, Moses Coleman took his wagon, and by the way, he was a massive man. He weighed 365 pounds. And he fell out of bed once. They said the boys had to roll him on a door and pick him up together and put him back in bed. I mean, he was quite a one to hit. So I don't know what it was like for those horses. It took he and the supplies to Valley Forge, but that's what he did. He collected supplies. Anything you could give him in the parish went into his wagon, and in 1775 he went in the dead of winter from Byfield to Valley Forge to give Washington supplies. And it's kind of a symbol of how the country felt about that effort to free itself from the English king. Those really are the key graves there in the burial ground beside the church. Across the street is Peg Pillsbury. He died in the 1800s, late 1800s. I think he lived a long time, but he invented the shoe peg. And his nickname was Peg Pillsbury. And he revolutionized, as they say, the shoemaking industry by this invention. Another one that has nothing to do with gravestones, but another inventor, Perkins, had a factory in the late 1700s down by the falls in Newbury, and he's the first one to invent a process for making machine-made nails. And it changed the whole dynamic in building a house, when you didn't have to have the blacksmith hammer out every nail separately or order them or something. I read the number, I can't tell you here off the top of my head, but it was an amazing number of nails that he could produce in one day down at the factory. Also across the street in the Georgetown side graveyard is a Supreme Court Justice, William Moody. Taft wanted to be in the Supreme Court, but he got roped into being president. And so his friend was William Moody, a descendant of this Mehetabel who started the Byfield Parish Church, but who lived in Byfield in her house. He was born at least in that house. And so William Moody, being a friend of Taft, appointed him to the Supreme Court. And his grave is in the yard, across the street from us, in the Georgetown side of the cemetery. We got a letter from the Supreme Court years ago. They were confirming where all their justices were buried, and we got a letter and had to respond to tell them, yes, William Moody is here in this graveyard. And when Moody died in 1910, Taft did come. I think it was to Byfield, if not it was to Haverhill, but I believe it was Byfield where they held a funeral for Moody, and Taft was in attendance. So he was here. And then I'll tell you one other person who's not very famous, but she's kind of important to me, Olive Hewson. Now, why Olive Hewson? Because she predicted that I would be in the Byfield Church at least 7 years. Now, it turned out to be 49, but at the beginning it was interesting that she predicted this. Now, I'll tell you why it's interesting to me, and I hope you'll be interested in the story. This is a little more autobiographical than I'm usually am at this, but I connect personally to the Byfield Parish Church, and I'll tell you why. Byfield Parish Church was incorporated on November 17th in 1706. That was the day Moses Hale, the first pastor, was ordained. I was born on November 17th in 1939, and Moses Hale, the first pastor, is my fifth cousin, 8 generations removed. We are related, and we are the only 2 pastors who ever served the Byfield Parish Church for more than 40 years each. Between the 2 of us, we reach almost 90 of the 310 years of the Byfield Parish Church. We were there almost a third of the life of the church, the 2 of us. So that makes it very, interesting to me, to say the least. The Byfield Parish Church was spiritually almost dead when I came, and that's not my judgment, that's statistical. There was one service at the Byfield Church, my year of 1969, when 1 man came to church. It's a hard to deal with a worship service where you got a pastor, an organist, and 1 person. Yeah. 20 years later, we built a $2 million building without fundraising. We paid it off. We had to borrow some of it. When I say fundraising, I mean we didn't go to a community or anything, but we paid it off. We had to borrow $1 million of the $2 million, and we paid it off 6 years in advance, again without fundraising. And that's because God acted in that church. He did something that only He could do. And but God called me to that church. I find out later. Now all of this I'm telling you, I did not know. I'm walking like anybody else by faith, not sight. I'm walking, just living my life trying to be obedient and do what I'm supposed to do, and I did. All of this came in retrospect, what I'm telling you now, I found out. Well, of course, the first thing was very interesting as I look back, because I was led by signs when I look back and see them. Now, you have to know about me that I was not really a good candidate, humanly speaking, for ministry. Because I mean, I like to speak and all, but I don't want to sit up front, I like to sit up back. I don't need to be recognized, I just soon not have my name. That's just my personality. And so, I get called to pastoral ministry, which kind of puts you in the center of things. And my background is not to do visitation. Not that I mind it, I like to talk to folk, but it's not my thing. I trained German troops in guided missile electronics. That's what my background is. I was at Fort Bliss, Texas for 3.5 years, and my majors in college were, my major was history, and my minor was political science, and on and on. Then I got called to ministry. Now I get this piece of paper when I first started with a note from the deacons of the church, who were really the leaders at the time, and I'm just coming in. They hadn't had a pastor for 2 or 3 years by the time I came. They've been looking for one, and I have a piece of paper about that big with about 6 or 7 names on it, and they said to me, "Would you visit these people?" Because I wasn't supposed to, by the way, do anything in ministry for a few months because I was still finishing my schoolwork. He said, "But these people are desperate for a visit from a minister. Would you visit them?" And I said, "Of course I will." So Olive Houston was at the top of the list, and she lived downtown in Byfield, and she was frightened, as I learned, because she had a heart condition, and she was afraid she was not going to make it. And she wanted to meet the pastor. Well, so I went down, and I knocked on the door, and I expected to go in and have a visit. Well, don't you know, I didn't know this at the time, but her husband was entering into dementia, and I didn't know that. And I knock on the door, and I said, "I'm the new pastor. Your wife wants to visit." And he looks at me, he says, "My wife doesn't want to see anybody." And I can hear this little voice down here saying, "Let him in, Ralph, let him in." So what do you do? I couldn't take him and throw him aside. It's his home. But I'm standing there, he's telling me to get lost, and she's saying, "Let him in." And so I thought, this is going to be interesting, this new career. So I stood there, not knowing really what to do, and he lost track of what he was doing because he was entering as he walked away. So when he walked away, I went in, and she was in an old salt box house. She had the shade down, probably for the sun in her eyes, I don't know. She was probably in her middle 70s at the time, and she was in a rocker type chair with a blanket. And she summoned me up, and she wanted me to pull the chair over, and I figured, I was wise enough to know maybe she can't hear well. So I pulled it up, and she reached out and she grabbed my hand and she said, "Oh, did I want to meet the man who's going to bury me?" Well, I was not prepared to answer that question. I did not, it was not part of my training. So anyway, we talked, and then time went on. And 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and our children came along, and my wife got close to her, and we used to go down actually because she needed a lot of company. She was put in a nursing home, and her husband was put in one room, and she in another, and we visited. And my wife, you have to know my wife, went in for the anniversary, and she was so upset that the two of them couldn't be together, and she went back to Byfield and talked to the women of the church and the women of the Methodist church, and we took them out of the nursing home, put them back in their home, and cared for them for 3 years. Bringing in food every day, taking care of all the laundry. Nurses in the congregation went in to check on them twice a week. They were there for 3 years in their own home together. And so anyway, so now we're going overseas, my wife and I, and we have 2 kids by now, because I was enrolled to the University of Edinburgh, Divinity School, because I was on sabbatical. And it was all arranged, and of course we had, have to do that kind of thing well in advance. And we were to leave the Sunday, Easter Sunday in 1976. And it happened to be on that Wednesday, it was my wife's turn to bring the meal to Olive. So we went down the Tuesday night, had a visit, and Miriam said, "Olive, what would you really like?" "Oh, I'd love a fish chowder." Well, so Miriam traces it back, and my family's in Ipswich, and my aunt made fish chowder from a day. I think turned 2. I don't know, but she really knew how to make fish chowder. And so she gives Miriam the whole recipe, and she got it all out and makes the fish chowder. And down we go to Olive the next night, and we sat with she and Ralph, and our kids were there, and we had the fish chowder. And she died that night. She died that night. And the burial was less than 24 hours before we flew to Edinburgh, Scotland for 4 months. If she had not died that night, I would not have been the man who buried her. It was like God said, and I look back, it's like God saying to me, you'll have a lot of things to deal with. When you get a church with one person, you got a long way to go. But I'm going to keep you there. You're going to be there through this whole thing, and I'm going to use your life to change that church. That's what I didn't get all of that until after I thought about her death. I thought, she said to me at the very beginning, you will bury me. And she died, as I say, in such a way that I buried her less than 24 hours before we got on a plane to go overseas. It was amazing. So anyway, that's a little verbal trip through the Byfield burial ground.